Hello, everybody. We're back for the fourth talk on the effects of human appropriation of ecosystem goods and services. And today, what we want to look at is the addition of nutrients to aquatic systems, which results in a process called eutrophication. So, our goal is for you to understand eutrophication, and then after that, I will summarize this unit and I will also discuss what's coming up next. So let's get started. It turns out that most aquatic ecosystems have very low levels of dissolved nutrient ions in the water. And in particular, nitrogen ions and phosphorus ions are relatively rare and thus at very low concentrations. We call such systems oligotrophic. That's just the word that aquatic ecologists use. As a result of this, plant growth, and in water that means phytoplankton, various types of algae, plant growth is severely limited by the lack of these nutrients. So we say it's limited by the concentration of these nutrients. If there were more of the nutrients, the algae would grow more. The general rule is that low availability of nitrogen limits plant growth in salt water, whereas it's low availability of phosphorus that limits plant growth in fresh water. In these systems, organic matter that enters the system is quickly decomposed by aerobic decomposer bacteria, and then those bacteria release the nutrients back into the water, and that's quickly picked up by the sparse population of algae. The natural state of most aquatic ecosystems is to have low nutrient levels, low phytoplankton populations, and as a result, they have very clear water. The enrichment of a body of water with nutrients is termed eutrophication. And if humans are the ones adding those nutrients, then we can call it cultural eutrophication or human-induced eutrophication, but often we just refer to it as eutrophication. But the implication is that humans have caused it. The addition of nutrients causes a cascade of ecological effects, and I want you to understand these and be able to repeat these and be able to use this knowledge as you go forward in the course and in your future as environmentally aware citizens. So the first response is that as soon as nutrients are added to a body of water, is that algal populations grow. And as a result, the water starts to lose its clarity, and we can say the turbidity or cloudiness of the water increases. And with a large enough or a continuous enough addition of nutrients, the water will turn bright green due to the presence of these microscopic plants. And such an event is termed an algal bloom. And here's what it looks like. This is a pond which has a huge amount of algae growing in it. These are microscopic plants that now cumulatively have turned the water bright green. And this is even picked up on Google Maps. And look at this. Here you can see a very large lake, and you can see the algal blooms here and here all along the shoreline. And the only places where there aren't algal blooms that are visible from space are in this very deep water. Can you tell where this is? If you're good at geography of North America, you should be able to figure it out. And I just want to say, this is a pretty amazing lake. You might say it's pretty great. So let's move on with this cascade of effects. So the first thing is the algal bloom. What happens next? As organisms in the bloom begin to die, they are rapidly decomposed by aerobic bacteria, and thus the population of aerobic bacteria grows as more and more dead plant material is put into the aquatic ecosystem. And as a result, the oxygen in the water is depleted by the decomposition carried out by these aerobic bacteria. At first, the water becomes hypoxic, meaning it has inadequate oxygen. And then ultimately, it can become anoxic, which means that it has no oxygen in it. Once we have an anaerobic environment, or a mostly anaerobic environment, motile organisms flee if they're fast enough, while sedentary organisms will perish. So this cascade of effects is pretty detrimental to an aquatic ecosystem because it causes the loss of a lot of the larger organisms. The consequence of dumping nutrients into water is therefore an algal bloom, followed by the lowering or complete loss of oxygen in the water, and then finally a complete change in the community structure of the ecosystem as larger macroscopic species relocate or die. Now, the largest causes of cultural eutrophication are the following: phosphates from laundry detergents, sewage effluent, which contains large amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus, leaching from septic systems. Septic systems, you know, are those underground sewage systems such as cesspools or a septic field, and these can leach into surface water. And then finally, the erosion of fertilizers from farm fields. So fertilizers that were meant for crops that get carried off in erosive events into surface water. These can also carry large amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus. And it is vitally important that as students of environmental issues, you understand this cascade of effects and are able to repeat it. I consider it one of the top 10 most important things you will learn about in an environmental studies course. Now, if organic matter is simply dumped into an aquatic system, we bypass that first step of the algal bloom, but deoxygenation still occurs due to the response of the aerobic decomposer bacteria. Any organic material dumped into water creates a demand for oxygen. And what does that mean? Well, it means the amount of oxygen required by the bacteria to decompose or oxidize that organic matter back into carbon dioxide and water. And as a result, it will release its nutrients and may cause a secondary algal bloom, which will then cause another release of organic matter. You can see why the dumping of organic matter is also problematic. And the amount of organic matter suspended in water can be easily measured and is used to calculate what's called the BOD, the biological oxygen demand. So we can easily do a test on the turbidity of the water, how clear it is or how cloudy it is, and from there calculate how much biological oxygen demand it is, and therefore calculate how much pollution with organic matter is in that water. The higher the BOD, the more likely a body of water is to become anoxic and thus suffer the horrific effects of low or no oxygen in an aquatic ecosystem. Clear water has a very low BOD, whereas murky water has a high BOD. The largest sources of BOD are industrial waste, such as those from slaughterhouses, feedlots, paper mills, tanning factories, as well as poorly treated human sewage, which means human sewage where not all the organic material is knocked out. Here is a case study on the effect of biological oxygen demand. In this case, there was a huge release of organic matter into a river at distance 0. And what happened was you could then measure the amount of biological oxygen demand as a function of distance from the initial release. And you can see this was studied up to 150 kilometers downstream. So that's about 100 miles downstream of the original spill. Now note what happens to the relationship between BOD at the point of the spill and as you get further down. Well, of course, the biological oxygen demand is going to be highest at the point of the spill or the point of the input of the organic material, and then it's going to decrease as bacteria do their decomposer job until you get to about 125 kilometers downstream and you have it back to a normal level. In addition, I want you to note where the dissolved oxygen became critically low in comparison to where the fish kill happens. So the dissolved oxygen, which is the green line here, begins to shrink immediately. But it's not until about 25 kilometers downstream, or maybe 20 kilometers downstream, that you actually get fish kill. And you actually get these incredibly low levels. And it's not until you get back up to almost 100 kilometers downstream that you no longer get a fish kill. So the question is, how come the oxygen doesn't immediately drop here? Well, can you figure out the answer to that? Well, the water that's coming in from upstream is constantly adding oxygen. So the action of the bacteria decomposing the organic matter that creates this BOD takes a while to deplete oxygen. But once the oxygen gets below a certain level, and here it looks about 10 milligrams per liter of water, the fish start to die. So that's the effect of an organic waste pollution event. You would have a similar effect if it were a nutrient release. Okay, so that's the process of cultural eutrophication, the effects of the human dumping of nutrients into aquatic ecosystems and or organic material into an aquatic ecosystem. So in this unit, we have looked at the damage to ecosystems caused by humans disturbing these ecosystems. And a lot of this damage is often subtle. For example, urban sprawl is a subtle effect. The use of primary productivity can be a subtle effect. The addition of nutrients to the ecosystem is a subtle effect. But scientifically, the effects of these things are demonstrated. And we also know that these issues have grown to such a scale that they have become a global as opposed to merely a local problem. Each of the categories of problems that we have studied in this unit provides us lessons to show how we as human beings must change our habits in order to live sustainably. And I think that's the importance of this unit. It really suggests concrete ways to become sustainable. When we get to the water pollution unit, we will see how water has to be treated, for example, so that it won't have these ecological effects. In the next unit, we are going to further develop the idea that millions of other species share the planet. And we're going to do this by looking at our evolutionary history. So, until next time, study hard.